Time for another game theory video. I'm losing my voice. Just because I've been talking about the progression of games, again, and what I would do if I was going to change Street Fighter, that kind of thing. And it's been getting asked about on stream, and something I've touched upon before. Let me talk about why Dragon Ball FighterZ is the biggest dropped fighting game in the history of fighting games, right? The biggest dropped ball, right? And why it's now more of a better time than ever that someone in the community that has the know-how should actually try to make their own fighting game or their own revision of a current fighting game, right? So basically, in the common mind of maybe the fighting game community, more or less, unless you count something like Mortal Kombat or something, right? Generally speaking, though, 2D-wise, right, we have three kind of fighting games, right? You have a Street Fighter game, right? You know what I mean? Asterisk mark, King of Fighters, asterisk mark, Fighters History, whatever the hell it might be. A Street Fighter kind of game, right? Then you have a Guilty Gear game, asterisk mark, the anime game, whatever it might be, right? And the third type of fighting game you have is the verse game, you know what I mean? Like a Marvel kind of game, right? Generally speaking, these are the three kind of ideas of what a fighting game can be that is in the popular consensus, you know what I mean, of the fighting game community. Unless you count something like Mortal Kombat, or if we get into 3D games, but I'm not getting into that, right? So the reason that Dragon Ball FighterZ was such a humongously huge dropped ball, and the biggest drop ball in the history of fighting games, in my opinion, is because it is not often, and obviously it's not very often when I say that there's only basically three kinds of fighting games in the first place, right? How rare is it that you actually have an opportunity to make a legitimate new fighting game that can put a legitimate new spin on what a fighting game can be, right? Almost never, because fighting games, if we were to think the first fighting game really in the eyes of the fighting game community is Street Fighter 2, right? Of course, there's other games besides that, but generally speaking, since Street Fighter 2, we consider Street Fighter 2 the first real quotation marks fighting game, right? Competitively speaking, probably, right? That's why Dragon Ball FighterZ is such a huge drop ball, because it's not like, say, something like a Guilty Gear character or a verse style character cannot necessarily come into a Street Fighter game. We can't necessarily transition them or remix them into a Street Fighter game, right? Now, a Street Fighter game, we could transition Ryu into a Guilty Gear character. You could make these Street Fighter characters more Guilty Gear, right? Which is another reason why I say Guilty Gear from some perspective is a, kind of like a progression of Street Fighter. And of course, we've seen Ryu and Street Fighter characters become Marvel characters, right? But not all these Marvel characters and not all these Guilty Gear characters could have become Street Fighter characters. Just like a Street Fighter character, we wouldn't be able to see Ryu, right? We wouldn't be able to see Ryu in a Dragon Ball FighterZ game. A game with reflecting, a game with, homing dash, you know what I mean? All this kind of stuff. Ryu would not be able to transition to a Dragon Ball FighterZ game. Not all Guilty Gear characters or not all verse style characters could transition to Dragon Ball FighterZ. So by that definition, basically, Dragon Ball FighterZ is one of the only opportunities that we have, and a very rare opportunity for a fighting game to be completely different, to throw a new perspective on what a fighting game can be. Because obviously we have a game in their own kind of genres of this 1, 2, 3 that I'm giving. Ryu could work in a King of Fighter game. Ryu could work in these other kind of 2D games, these specific ones, right? But not all character types are necessarily going to work in each one of these, right? That's why these are three distinct genres of the fighting game that I talk about. And Dragon Ball FighterZ has its opportunity to be a very distinct genre of what a fighting game could be, right? And that's why I think Dragon Ball FighterZ was such a huge drop ball and the biggest drop ball in the history of fighting games, right? Because these kind of opportunities to throw a new perspective on what a fighting game could be do not come along often, right? But Dragon Ball FighterZ is such a fundamentally fucked up game, it doesn't work, right? And it's a huge drop ball. And there was no reason to do this because people are going to buy it because it was a Dragon Ball FighterZ game. You don't need to tone down the fundamentals of what made fighting games popular in the first place with Dragon Ball FighterZ, because people are going to buy it no matter what because it's a Dragon Ball Z game. People bought a lot of those terrible Super Nintendo Dragon Ball Z games, right? You know people are going to buy it. Another example of this would be, of course, Season 3 was coming out with Dragon Ball FighterZ. How many fucking of these nerds do you see like, oh, I'm never going to play Dragon Ball FighterZ again unless they fix homing dash, unless they fix, auto combos, unless they fix vanish. I'm never playing this game again. I'm never playing this game again, I swear. Excuse me. What happened? Dragon Ball FighterZ Season 3 came out. All these nerds who said they were never going to play the game again, they added another assist. They added the layup assist, and some characters got beam assist. Oh, fuck, Krillin can do a beam assist? I'm playing this game. It's like, motherfucker, I just thought you said you were never going to play this game again because of homing dash, auto combo. You hate all these mechanics of what make Dragon Ball FighterZ, blah, 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 blah. Thought you were never going to play it again, but they added the layup assist, and now you think it's great again. So, it just goes to show you the community has no backbone whatsoever. These motherfuckers were going to buy the game anyway. Proof, right? So you didn't need to take away the fundamentals of the game. But that's why I say there's only, generally speaking, 3 kinds of 2D games, right? Asterisk mark, Mortal Kombat, I guess, if you count that shit. But anyway, but that gets into another thing. If we think about how fundamentals are being destroyed in fighting games all around in the first place, right? These fighting games nowadays are such fan fiction from what they formerly were, story-wise, and they're basically fan-made games anyway. The original people aren't even totally making them anyway. They're so far from the original ideas of what made Street Fighter, what made King of Fighters, whatever the case. Guilty Gear is a product of its own success, maybe. It's become an anime game in a negative light, right? So these games are becoming so far removed from what they were originally in the first place. They're basically fan-made games anyway, right? And destroying the fundamentals of fighting games. That's why I say, actually, to end this, what I've been saying in stream, this is now more of a time than ever for someone to actually make a awesome fan-made fighting game. Doesn't have to be a brand new fighting game, but a fighting game based off of, make your own version of Street Fighter, your own version of Guilty Gear, your own Dragon Ball FighterZ. Of course, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Jesus Christ, you can make Dragon Ball FighterZ really cool, right? Again, because it's one of the only opportunities to make a new fighting game if you did your own fan remix of that. But it's actually super interesting if you think about it, because if you think about a fighting game, what is a fighting game, right? Fighting game is, to make a fighting game, you need music, you got 2 characters, and you got a background, right? That's a fighting game, dude, right? It's not fucking rocket science. Maybe it's rocket science to make a good one, but the idea of it shouldn't be rocket science, you would think, right? But then you get into, and such a good example is you think of other kind of fan-made games. You have these fan-made Sonic games or fan-made Mega Man games, and I've talked about Mega Man X Corrupted, right? You know what I mean? Who knows if that game is ever coming out, right? Knock on wood, dude, right? You know what I mean? But if you look, there's a lot of legitimately pretty cool fan-made games that you can be like, you know what? And there's a lot of trash too, dude. There's a lot of fucking trash. But there's a lot of fan-made games, and then you're like, wow, this is actually probably just as good as the new legitimate stuff, right? Because the new legitimate stuff is trash. Isn't that fucking amazing in the first place, right? A lot of this stuff is, it's pretty good as well, dude, right? This could be a real game. But when you look at a fighting game, look at all these Mugen games. It's actually pretty interesting. You would think that when you're making a fan-made Mega Man game or any of these other games, you would think, look at all this stuff you got to make from scratch, basically, right? More or less, right? And then when you think about people making these Mugen games for fighting games, there should be less effort, you would think, right, to make it. And yet these Mugen games are complete trash, right? And a lot of times they're trying to, here's the thing. I'm not, like I said, I'm a very creative person. I'm very confident creatively speaking, raw skill-wise, I guess, in fighting games, whatever, too. But I'm very confident creatively speaking. I'm not afraid of anyone trying to challenge me intellectually about a fighting game. Most of these dudes can't even talk about a fighting game. It's ridiculous, but I have no smart. I'm a fucking idiot, right? I am an idiot in terms of programming, or else I would try to make my proof of concept of what Street Fighter should be, what Dragon Ball FighterZ should be, what Guilty Gear could be, blah, 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 right? Because it's amazing that you look at these fighting games when people make these Mugen games, or what they had, this like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike and a Half, whatever the fuck it was called. They had fucking what else did they have? They had Street Fighter 5 Black Edition, or whatever the hell it was called, Evil Edition. I don't remember, Championship, whatever the fuck they were called, dude. And you look at these games and they're fucking weird as hell, dude. They don't even feel right. And how a game feels is one of the most fucking important things, right? Because think about some of the most famous Mugen, the most famous stuff in even fighting game Mugen stuff is actually, say, like the Evil Ryu and Evil Ken, right? And as awesome and as cool, as interesting as those characters are, even when you have tried them in Mugen, you can still tell that something is wrong. It doesn't feel right when you're playing them. It doesn't feel quite as crisp. There's something wrong with the engine. They just don't. But you try to forget it because you're like, oh, these characters are just so cool. We try to forget it. But the feel, and I talk about the feel in a fighting game a lot. The feel is wrong in these fan-made fighting games, and it's actually pretty amazing because you would think it should be the most simple thing to do. And I always said that I think the best way if you're going to make a proof of concept of these games is to take what you have and then just remix it. Take the foundation, because the foundation is what is so important that you're making a fighting game off of. You know what I mean? So it just goes to show you even more how that good foundation, keeping the goodwill of Street Fighter, the goodwill of video games is so important, because when you look at a lot of these fan-made games and fighting games, all of them feel like complete trash, basically, right? It's like they don't feel correct, and it's mind-boggling, because again, if anything, now is the time for the fans to actually get together, and make a legitimately cool, rebalanced, remix, new take on whatever these former past fighting games are, because the stuff that is out currently is already fan fiction in the first place. Do you get what I'm saying? Keeping my channel active, video game wise, game theory wise, the end.